Good evening. I'd like to call our regular council meeting for Monday, April the 12th to order. Hello to those watching the live web stream or those watching the meeting after this evening. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith, and joining me in the council chamber is Councillor Garnett, and our 5 councillor colleagues are joining us via Zoom. You can see them on your screen. Good evening to Councillor Duncan, Councillor Fallett, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul, and Councillor Wainwright. I'd like to first acknowledge that we're meeting in the territory of the Miscellaneous Nation this evening. And in looking to approve the agenda, there are three changes. The first is we have additional letters of correspondence for 2 agenda items this evening. And I will speak to those when we come to those agenda items. Second is we have 2 council reports. Councillor Garnett has a report for the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea and for the Memorial Park Society Mary Winspear Centre. And Councillor O'Keefe has a councillor update for SIP. And lastly, we have 2 items being raised from correspondence for information as per councillor requests. Councillor Duncan has clarified her original request to raise a letter from an email from the City of Courtenay. That is item 15.7 under correspondence for information. We'll raise that to 14A as it's related to another letter that was raised. And Councillor Fallett has requested raising item 15.1, an email from L. Townsend, and the staff response, and we'll raise that to our last item of correspondence as 14F. So with those changes, I would seek approval of our agenda, please.
Move the agenda as amended.
Second.
Any further discussion? Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll turn to our public participation period. We have our general public participation period. We do have no speakers this evening for the general public participation, and we have no submissions to be read aloud. With that, I'll move to our special public participation opportunity this evening. As per our retail cannabis procedures at the town, we provide a special public participation opportunity. And this evening it's with regards to the GEMA cannabis retail license application at 9774 3rd Street. We have received, there were 15 written submissions that were circulated as part of the agenda when it was published to the public on Thursday. Since that time, we've had an additional 21 submissions, and all members of council received those today and have had a chance to review them. With that, we do have just one speaker in this participation opportunity, and I'll now turn to Mr. Sean Bruce Hayes. If you're connected, please confirm you're connected. Good evening, Mr. Mr.
Yes,
Bruce Hayes.
thank you.
Yeah, we can hear you, and you have the floor for 3 minutes, sir.
Good evening. Thank you. It's wonderful to be back speaking to the Mayor Council again. I just want to take my 3 minutes to discuss some of the comments received that were in the agenda package, but also the community consultation that we were able to do since the last time I was here speaking. So for some of the residents that submitted communications against the proposed location, I did see some that mentioned the total number of stores as being an issue. And as I discussed in my previous presentation, there are similar sized towns with more than 3 stores, and it doesn't seem to be a problem. And I think it might more so be about the stigma of cannabis rather than whether or not Sydney can support more than 3 stores, especially when it does meet bylaw requirements and when there is support from businesses and support from residents. So I did also see some concerns about parking, and I don't think parking should be a consideration just because any other use could go into this zoning. So a use that would have a customer stay longer. I think our churn on customer use is going to be 5 to 10 minutes, where any use could go in there really that's permitted in that zoning and have worse parking and not go through this requirements that we're going through. So I don't think parking should be so much of a factor here. For the letters in support, I had a wonderful trip to Sydney last week. It was beautiful there, and it was wonderful. Everyone was very friendly. It was awesome to be back on the island. And I was able to speak with business owners and community members. And the reason for my trip was to engage with the community, meet with our neighbors, and hear any questions, concerns, or comments that the community might have. And many business owners and community members were in support of our application, including seven businesses in the area and 9 residents that signed letters of support. There were definitely some against, but not as many as I would normally encounter when I do this type of public consultation. One comment I received that was interesting is that a comment about the high prices from the store that's open right now. And I think that is bound to happen when there's only one store. And I think it's an argument that having 3 stores is going to be good for the community to help lower prices. I also want to add, we did get support from the BIA, from the Business Improvement Association. And the last thing I just want to add is that we're really excited about the opportunity to come to Sydney. We understand there is concerns, and we're committed to being a valued member of the community, and we'll do everything possible to achieve that goal.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce Hayes. We appreciate you coming before council with your comments this evening, and we'll be turning to the agenda item shortly. Thank you. And with that, I'll bring the special public participation opportunity to a close. And we now have a staff report with recommendations and options. And I'll first turn to staff for an introduction. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll defer to Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so this application, as you've described, is for 9774 3rd Street, and it's resulting from a Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch referral last fall in October. Shortly after that referral, Council reviewed it for the first time and indicated that they'd like to see the fit and proper assessment that the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch does completed before considering this application further. That was completed in December. GEMA brought forward their complete application to the town early in the new year, and we brought this back to council for further consideration in early March. Council then chose to move it forward to public notification stage. The notifications went out to the community the last week of March. Both a sign in the window of the proposed location, 2 newspaper advertisements, and notification letters to the surrounding residents and businesses were sent out. As the mayor indicated, we got a number of responses back, about 35 in total. The breakdown was 14 against and roughly 8 in favor from individual addresses and another 14 in favor submitted by the proponent themselves. Staff have given this application a thorough review. It's consistent with the town zoning and also consistent with our liquor and cannabis licensing policy, and staff are recommending approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I will first turn to council if they have any questions for Mr. Newcomb before we turn to one of the options that is presented in the report. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Newcomb, and I'll take direction from council. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. To get the discussion going, I will move that the town of Sydney recommends against the issuance of a cannabis retail store license for GEMA Cannabis located at 9774 3rd Street for the following reasons. Its close proximity to other cannabis retailers and family-oriented facilities, and in acknowledgement of concerns raised by residents. Number 2, the town has considered the general impact on the community of the proposed cannabis retail store and has determined that the impact will, on balance, be negative. And further, that council directs staff to provide the LCRB with a copy of all of the written responses received in response to the public notification of the GEMA cannabis referral, a summary of any responses provided in person at the April 12th, 2021 council meeting, and a description of the methods used to gather those views.
Second.
So we have it moved and seconded. Just before we proceed, Councillor O'Keefe, we could hear you reasonably well. If you have the opportunity to turn your mic up just a little bit, it would perhaps help just a little.
Okay, just, oh, it is up pretty high. Does that sound any better?
Yep, that's just a little better. Thank you. And as the mover, I'll turn to you first to motivate and then to Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, so sure. I guess first I want to reiterate once again that I'm not opposed to these businesses. I recognize they're legal. They have a right to operate. But my issue is also always with the health impacts and the impact on the community. We know that senior levels of government have recognized that there's negative health and social impacts to cannabis, and that's why the provincial government has included local governments in the approval process. I just want to comment on some of the reasons in support of this, and there's quite a bit that sort of relates to the economic argument. The points about feet on the street, so to speak, mentioned by in the report and from the BIA. So I just want to point out that when we constructed our policy and how we were going to review these, the economic benefit was, we didn't identify that specifically as something that we would consider. And presumably that was because we considered the advice of health authorities when we drafted the policy. And so health authorities strongly cautioning against using economic gain from the legalization of non-medical cannabis, and stating that promoting and protecting health should remain the primary concern for us. There's also comments that we should allow the marketplace to determine what an appropriate number of stores are. And, you know, the proponent indicated that also having more stores might bring the price down. However, just reminding us again that this is, in terms of letting the marketplace decide, this is not like any other business. And because of the health aspects, we have a responsibility to consider those aspects. In terms of the location, so our policy mentions having a 100-meter buffer between other cannabis retailers, childcare facilities, public communities, and all those other sort of family-oriented things. So this particular store, within its 100-meter radius, which is what we've used from the beginning for these stores. So it does have the Scout Hall and the museum within that 100-meter radius. And I note that staff have commented that neither of these is visible from the store. However, I think the point is, it's not whether they're visible or not. The issue of proximity was something that was brought up by health authorities in the context of exposure to youth and normalizing cannabis in the community. So the concern was that families and youth who were going to and fro these family-oriented activities would be exposed to cannabis stores. And I guess, you know, whether personally some of us may think that that's not a big deal, if your kid sees a cannabis store, big whoop-de-doo. However, it is something that health authorities have said is something that helps to normalize cannabis in our community, and it's something to be aware of. So if our health authority tells me to wear a mask and social distance because there's a pandemic, I listen to what they say. And so if they're telling us that there should be these distances between stores and between family sort of activities, I'm going to heed that. In terms of location to other cannabis retailers, there are two that are just on the doorstep of the 100-meter radius. And even though they're technically just outside of the 100 meters, for me, it's close enough to have a concern about the density of the stores in the downtown core. And I guess I just remind us all and the community that the recommendation from health authorities was actually that we should have a 300-meter radius, and preferably 600 meters. So I'm quite comfortable, rejecting on that, just the fact that those two are just outside of the 100-meter radius. I think we've heard a fair amount from our community in terms of, I get a sense that they feel that 2 is quite enough for Sydney, and I tend to agree. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of comments, and first off, I tend to subscribe to some of the concerns that were outlined from residents and the feedback that they provided, particularly those in the downtown core who I think probably it took note of the proposed hours of operation and had some concerns with respect to that. And days of operation as well, and so I'm sympathetic to their concerns. I don't think it's necessarily fair in the staff report to suggest that the hours of operation may equate to other businesses in Sydney. I can't think of too many that are open in a residential street with condominiums and apartments nearby that are operating until 11 p.m. And so that weighs on my mind. The other aspect is to the piece on the economic front and I guess the competitive environment that may have been created through this particular retail location, and looking at the size of the community. And I know the proponent commented on this, but the reality is our greater catchment, as is noted in the staff report, may well come to Sydney to shop. But there are also cannabis retail providers in place on Sakem First Nations land, for example, and Central Saanich. I think that the peninsula as a market does have some choice to make in terms of wanting to buy this product. So I think that's addressed competitively. And I would argue that it is council's place to give consideration to the number of cannabis retail locations we want to authorize. We wouldn't be having this discussion otherwise, frankly. It's a different product. It's our opportunity to contribute to the regulation in the retail environment. And so I will support the motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Further speakers? Councillor Fallett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I came into this looking at the variety of resident citizens, respondents to for input. And I thought we call out and ask for people's input. And if we don't regard it or we don't give it adequate weight, then what is the purpose of seeking input from residents? And to the points raised by Councillors O'Keefe and Chad, both the health issues and the proximity, I think this is something that we should pay attention to. We've got 2 stores at the time. This is a new retail type, and our community is undergoing some dramatic changes with densification. A significant number of residences are coming up in the downtown core, and there are going to be impacts for that evolvement. And I think we could almost take this as a pilot project and say, we've got 2 stores. Let's see how this goes, how our community responds and evolves. We're not cherry picking. These are just the first 2 out of the gate. That's just the way it is. We have the right to refuse, and I think the grounds that Councillor O'Keefe has cited are adequate. We are within the ballpark of the 100 meters, and I think that's right to call that one forward and say that's a little bit close. But I think for me, on top of that is the changes that our community is undergoing, and now we're looking at a third retailer selling a product that is a relatively new to the market. And it's all happened in the last little while. Not new to the market as in this style of retail sales. I think it's fair for us to say, we're just going to put a pause here. Let's see how our community moves forward. We heard from Island Health regarding health concerns. I think those are valid things to pay attention to. And this is where I'm going to draw my line on this one. I'm not going to support this third application, despite their great business plan and all the rest of it. I just think at this point, we need to, this is how far we go. We don't take it further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Follett. Oh, sorry, Councillor Duncan, I'm sorry, your hand is similar to your wall color.
It's very blue. Thank you. I won't support this motion. I do concur with Councillor Rintoul about the hours, and I don't believe that they're appropriate for the kind of mixed use residential and commercial of this area. If it was a clothing store and they were going to be open till 11 p.m., I'm not sure that would be appropriate in this area either. So I know that our other liquor stores in town, Beer and Wines, I believe even the distillery, which is right across from some condos and next to the pier, they are open late as well, but they're not, none of them are directly below any residences. And so I feel that, but that's a simple request that we can make. But in terms of not approving this one, I understand Councillor Follett's point about, by now we've received kind of a split and there are a lot of people who are still voicing objections. However, I look for not just the quantity of the objections, but what they are saying as well. And a lot of them, what they're saying is they never liked pot in the first place and they don't want there to be pot here. And it's going to become known as a cannabis town, which is, as Mayor McNeil-Smith pointed out last time, is and the proponent has pointed out, there are many towns with just as many or perhaps more pot shops per capita, and we have not rebranded them pot towns. Some people may feel that that's where they're living, but that's not going to be a broader perception. Notably, the Scout Hall, the guides and the Scouts were notified of this application and chose not to respond, which can be taken as it is. And I feel while the health authority has made their statement and they have put forward their advice in the way they have, I think that actually the comparison with COVID is possibly a very good one at this time, because the health authorities have put forward recommendations. And how has that gone in terms of how the public have taken up their advice? And so I feel there is a limit to what you can tell people they can't do because they're bad and it's dangerous, and if they do it, they're bad people, before they're going to stop listening to you. And they're going to do it anyway. And we need to kind of recognize that people are going to engage in things that health authorities might think is harmful. And that we need to make sure that if they're going to keep doing those things, it can be done in a safe manner. And to that end, I see this as just, it's not ideal. I would love to live in a world where people didn't feel the need to do mind-altering substances regularly or in ways that might impact our, society, but that's not the world we live in. And I prefer that they're able to access a safe supply that they need. And so for that reason, I don't see a problem with letting the market sort out how many people want to purchase it legally and in safe, quantified manner here.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett and Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your comments, colleagues. It's some good thought that's been put forward. For me, the issue stems around proximity, and our rules state not to have more than one within 100 meters. The previously approved one at Bud's Cannabis is 105 meters, I believe. Truth and Alibi from this proposed site would be 110, 115. Mr. Newcomb could correct me, but somewhere in that range. I went out yesterday and I stood in front of Bud's Cannabis and I could actually see the proposed location. So it's not within 100 meters, but it's pretty darn close. And VHA, or Island Health, is recommending not within 300 meters. Well, we would have 3 within 300 meters. I don't have an issue with having more than 2 in town. I just don't think this is the right location. I think there's too many too close together. And for me, that's problematic. That's really the one area that I'm stumbling on with this whole application, is just the fact that there's 3 so close together within the confines of the town. So I will be supporting the motion put forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to be supporting this particular motion, and I'm actually having a bit of difficulty with the debate we're having in terms of some of the topics we're covering. The motion, if we were to recommend that the license not be issued, we have to do it we have to list the reasons. And some reasons were proposed in the motion. And quite a bit of the debate is about things that were not proposed in the motion. So, for example, recommending against it because Island Health it suggests it should be 300 or even 600. What we're supposed to be talking about is recommending against it because of the impact it's going to have on the community, not because it's different than what Island Health says. And we actually had quite a lengthy discussion about the policy and coming up with that 100-meter distance. And we were aware of and considered Island Health's recommendation at the time. So to adopt a policy that says 100 meters and then say no because it's more than 100 meters is a difficult thing to support. There is an option to simply not make a recommendation, and then we don't get ourselves into a situation where there is being a debate on the record with a variety of people articulating reasons that aren't related to the motion that's being voted on. And we've already had one court case, and I really do not want to see us going in that particular direction. So I'm definitely not supporting this particular motion. I do understand that, and we're hearing quite a bit of input about 2 is enough, 3 is too many, coming from the community, and I do. I certainly hear that argument. I'm listening. But if we were going to go in that particular direction, the right approach would have been to say, we think there's an opportunity for X number of stores in Sydney. Here's a request for expressions of interest. We'll pick the best 2 proposals based on the nature of the company and the locations, and then, close the door. Here, it's sort of a, well, the first 2 came in the door, and granted, we're not picking winners. They happen to be the first 2, and now we're getting suggestions that we should stop. But we actually should have, that should be a significant discussion. I do also, I am also listening to the arguments that it's not really our expertise to pick winners, and that the market does take care of this kind of thing itself. At any rate, I am not going to support the motion that's on the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I will take an opportunity to speak, and I appreciate all the comments from colleagues. For me, this is difficult, as I know it's been for some of my colleagues. And what I'm hearing from the public through the letters and through the discussions is that we know we have people in our community who are opposed to cannabis. they're opposed to X number of stores, and so on. I think in our previous deliberations, we have answered or we have addressed those concerns. But this application is much of our discussion has been around the proximity of the stores. And I think the reference to, while our policy is 100 meters, the reference to Island Health's direction I don't think is out of order. We are acknowledging what is in our policy. Where it comes for me is that even for the community, a portion of the community that is accepting of cannabis retail in the downtown, they didn't envision seeing stores across the downtown every 100 meters. And it turns out that that's what's happening to date. And I'm not suggesting we should be saying a certain number is, we should choose a certain number. I don't agree with that. However, if you abide by our current policy of 100 meters, we could have a half a dozen or more stores just in the downtown. And what number do you stop at? 4, 5, 6, and for what reason? So for me, it turns on the proximity of the locations and actually that the community is, sorry, I want to go back to the policy. And as Councillor O'Keefe indicated, and I'm just going to turn to it here. So in our council policy under evaluation and approval guidelines for cannabis retailers, it's with regards to locations, it says when reviewing an application, council will consider the impact the cannabis retailer will have when they are located within 100 meters of other cannabis retailers, liquor stores, and then it goes on to name of a number of family-oriented businesses such as childcare facilities, educational facilities, libraries, and so on. I believe there's a distinction to be made in the buffer to the family uses and a distinction distinction between the buffer between stores. And I don't know that we actually considered that in our when we were forming this policy. And you could have a half a dozen retailers, cannabis retailers, that were not within 100 meters of these family-related businesses, but they could be within 100 meters of each other. And I don't believe the majority of our community is accepting of that at this time. So I appreciate the policy we have in place, but we've listened to the feedback from the public, and that's the feedback that I've gained, and hence my decision to support the motion. I see Councillor O'Keefe is the second speaker. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, just wanted to comment on a couple of things. So in regards to, the conversation that we're having, not reflecting what's in the motion, I'm satisfied that it does, because what we've been talking about is, yes, Island Health was mentioned, but basically what we're talking about is proximity. And I think the mayor articulated it maybe better than I did in terms of, for me, that's the main issue, the densification of having so many stores in a particular area. So in that regard, I think I'm quite happy that the motion reflects kind of the concerns that we're talking about. In regards to comments about, we had a policy and we should stick to the policy. We are sticking to the policy. The policy says if there's child or family activities with a 100-meter radius, that's a concern. In terms of, the other two stores being just slightly a few feet out of the perimeter, yeah, it's true. It's not exactly 100 meters. However, you know what? We exercise flexibility in our policies all the time in terms of whether trees should get cut down or variances or things to do with the OCP. So I'm comfortable exhibiting that amount of flexibility and comfortable with the way the things we have now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan for a second time.
Thank you. To the point Councillor Wainwright raised about the way we are dealing with this application and the unevenness under the liquor and cannabis policy does concern me, actually. So right next to the Shaw Ocean Discovery Center, our largest family-centered attraction, there is an open-air patio on which you can be served liquor. Across from that patio, there is a beer and wine store. And on the other side of the Ocean Discovery Center, certainly all three of these things are less than 300 or less than 100 meters from the Ocean Discovery Center. There is an alcohol distillery. They do not just serve it. They do not just sell it. They actually make it. And just a little bit further down from that, there is another restaurant with an open air patio. So when I take my children to the Ocean Discovery Center and for a snack afterwards, I can have them walk past several venues where people can actually be imbibing alcohol in open glasses right in front of them, with boards talking about how they can, with all of the alcohol that's for sale. I could actually sit at a table with my children and drink it if I wanted to because of the type of license. And so to make the argument that we will not have these things within 100 meters and that that's a valid argument and that we can't have three things within 100 meters because our town will be affected, our community will be negatively affected due to that use, and that there are too many of these things close to family things and within proximity to each other is very easy to show that that's not actually what the concern is, because liquor does an awful lot more damage to communities and to families and children in general. And we have normalized it to a much greater extent without any argument under exactly the same policy. So I feel that this is maybe not these just aren't really arguments that we can make under the current policy we have.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I think Councillor Duncan brings up a good point. And when you look at the information from health authorities, they acknowledge that alcohol does more and cigarettes than cannabis. However, the takeaway for me from the guidance that we got from the health department is they acknowledge that, you know what, we didn't do a very good job as a society when we rolled out cigarettes and alcohol. And perhaps we should have paid more attention to it. And in their guidance to us, they said that there is the option for us to be, looking at those sorts of things. Sadly, as Councillor Duncan points out, the cow is out of the barn on that one in terms of alcohol and cigarettes. And so I don't know that we can put the genie back into the bottle. But the takeaway for me from the health authorities is that, listen, we didn't do a great job in the past. Here's a new substance that we're introducing into our community. Let's not make the same mistakes we did in the past in terms of making this seem that it's okay and that it's normal. There are negative impacts. So let's do what we can so that we don't make the same mistakes that we did with cigarettes and alcohol. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no further speakers, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? We have two opposed, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Wainwright. The motion carries. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, please.
Yes, please go ahead, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. I'd like to propose a motion arising, and I move that staff be requested to review the town's liquor and cannabis licensing policy DV-015 with regard to increasing the minimum permissible distance between cannabis retail outlets in Sydney and report back to council.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul to motivate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly a theme throughout the motion and also throughout the discussion has been around the issue of proximity of cannabis retail locations. In a letter we received in a response, there was a reference to another municipality here in the CRD and their distance. I believe it referenced a 400-meter requirement. We've referred in our conversation to Island Health's guideline of a 300-meter requirement. And we've heard from colleagues in discussion various opinions on that issue of distance between cannabis retail, but certainly I would suggest a degree of discomfort with the closeness of the proximity that we've been debating and discussing in the case of this application. And so I would like to suggest that we give staff the opportunity to come back to council with some thoughts on the policy in relation to proximity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fallot, did you wish as the seconder to speak?
Nope, that covers it. Thank you very much, Councillor Chad, for bringing that one forward.
Okay, I'll turn to Mr. Humble, who wishes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could, I just want to confirm with Mr. Newcomb that we don't currently have an application that we're processing in midstream.
Mr. Newcomb.
No, this is the only active one at this time. There's nothing on the horizon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. Well, we have no public hearings this evening. We do have a presentation, and I will turn to our presenter, Nadine King. Can you confirm you're connected, please?
Yes.
Good evening. I'll just take a moment to
Mayor and Council. I will share my screen. Just give me
Ms. King?
to find the right button.
Ms. King, if I can just introduce you for a moment.
Sure.
So we are on the Beacon West traffic study, and we have a presentation from Nadine King from Watt Consulting. Ms. King, you have 10 minutes for your presentation. We'd be pleased if you would take council's questions after that, after your presentation. Thank you.
Let's see which screen this is going to come up on, hopefully. Are you seeing it as a presentation or still in my PowerPoint?
We are seeing your presentation.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Actually, we're seeing the PowerPoint, not
okay.
the presentation mode.
Let me try this again. Too many screens. I'm just going to put that over there and try this one. How's that? Yeah, well, thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing me the 10 minutes to present on this Beacon Avenue West traffic study. It was a joint project led by the town of Sydney, but also had stakeholders from BC Ministry of Transportation, the Victoria Airport Authority, and the District of North Saanich. Generally, the objectives of the study were to do a comprehensive review of the area of Beacon Avenue West, to evaluate the effects of potential development in the area, as well as regional growth, and to outline transportation improvements to support all road users, including vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists, and the heavy trucks in the industrial area. We took the planning direction and studies and previous studies. There's a comprehensive list and discussion in the report, but generally the OCPs, local area plans, active transportation plans, and regional studies, as well as previous traffic studies for the area. Jumping into the existing conditions, you're probably all fairly familiar with the area and the facilities, but looking at active transportation, so bikes and pedestrians, this map outlines sort of what is there today. top of the line is the excellent facility of the flight path, but there is fairly discontinuous sidewalks and bike lanes in the rest of the area. So we've heard from people that there was a lack of connectivity, a lack of lighting, and also a challenge getting across Highway 17 other than at the Beacon Avenue signal. But that's also potentially a challenge to get across as well if you're not very comfortable with high volumes of traffic. We looked at the transit network. In this area, there's actually 17 transit stops currently out there. They are all of a basic nature, which is basically just a bus stop sign and a painted curb if there is one. Frequency in the area is fairly low right now. It's mostly community transit. So you're looking at 1 to 2 hours between service. And that's sort of reflected in the amount of ridership that we see right now, which for all 17 stops is 33 passengers per day. So pretty low boardings and alightings in the area. We then looked at the road network. So first identifying, because of the different jurisdictions, the road classifications. So highway being the highest, then the arterials, and then the collectors and local roads. As expected, generally, Mills, McDonald, Park, Beacon, West Saanich are your higher volume, higher level roads, highway being the highest, and then all the other little roads being more of a local road nature. We did some comprehensive data collection in the area. This was undertaken in late August, early September 2020, so we were still in the pandemic, as we still are. But we did do a comparison with historical data and adjusted the traffic volumes to reflect what we would expect in a non-pandemic period. Generally, we found, traffic volumes vary up to 11,000 per day on Beacon Avenue. McDonald Park North, is the lowest at about 1,800. We also measured the speeds and compared them against the posted. Within the Sydney area, McDonald Park was the biggest differential at 10 kilometers above posted speed. Otherwise, generally within a few kilometers of the posted speed limit. Mills and West Saanich, which are in North Saanich, definitely have some speeding challenges due to the rural nature of the surrounding land uses and straight nature of the road in the sections that we measured. We also measured truck traffic, just to, we knew it was a heavy truck area, but we wanted to see how heavy. The northern section of McDonald Park Road, we're up in about 15%, but generally 8 to 15% truck traffic, which is a high percentage of truck traffic in the area. Generally, we would see on most, highways, general highways, sort of 3 to 5% truck traffic. So we're seeing quite a bit more truck traffic in this area than we would in other areas. We then reviewed the morning and afternoon traffic conditions. And I was going to add a table here about level of service. I did not. But basically, if you think of levels of service like letter grades, A, B, C, those are pretty good. You're doing okay. D is a bit borderline, and E and F are failing. And what we mean by failing is you may have to wait a signal to make the light. So you might make it 1 time out of 4-ish. 3 times, you're probably going to wait a light to get through. So what we found was that basically Beacon Avenue and the highway, all the left turns generally are problematic in the morning and the afternoon. The through movements are pretty good at the highway intersection. In the morning, the rest of the area is doing pretty well right now. It's C or better. Sterling, we have the northbound lefts that's coming off Sterling and turning left towards the industrial area. That fails in the afternoon. You do have to wait quite a bit of time to find a gap in traffic. And coming off Galaran, it's at a D, so it's sort of borderline, something that should be watched, but not a significant issue at this time. So we then looked at future land uses in the area, starting with the West Side Local Area Plan. Used the information from that plan to project additional gross floor area for industrial, commercial, and the mixed use, as well as new residential doors. And this generally gives you a sense. We're looking at about 1,700 extra doors and about 270,000 additional commercial space and about 1.2 million square feet of additional industrial space. In the Sydney portion, we then got this map from the Airport Authority, and they identified 9 locations for us, and as well as brought to our attention today, the Sydney Gateway Crossing, which is the small little development, well, not small, it's the development at Beacon Avenue West and Highway 17, accidentally got left out. I will talk about some of the ramifications of that when we talk about improvements, but it was about 9,000 square meters, or about 100,000 square feet of additional commercial above and beyond what I will be talking about here. And then we got from North Saanich, so they're not planning actually any additional development in North Saanich beyond the stand down development. Phase 1 is already completed with the Canadian Tire, but phase 2 and 3 would be similar to phase 1, and then some additional commercial retail restaurants, small spaces coming in. So all of that land use was added together, trips were developed for it, assigned to the network, and reviewed operationally for the morning and the afternoon with existing conditions in terms of traffic control and laning. And basically what we found was the highway intersection kind of implodes. We get all the left turns having problems, highway through movements having problems, and in the afternoon we get quite a number of failures on side streets within the area. So what to do about that? We'll start with the highway. We did have a meeting with highways, and they've indicated, so these are our suggested timings. They're looking at continuing to follow their studies. But basically there is some mitigation that could happen, which is adding dual left turn lanes and additional laning on Beacon West. It'll get you a little bit more capacity out of that intersection in the short term, sort of less than 5 years from now. But going forward beyond that, we're looking at grade separation. And this is a very old plan, so it is probably, well, I know it is not current and up to date because the fire hall is missing. And so this is just a sense of an at-grade crossing, or a grade separated crossing for Beacon Avenue. So that's, long term, that's still being projected to help facilitate growth on the west side. We were asked to look at Highway 17 and McDonald Park Road. What if the turn lanes on the highway were closed by the ministry? Basically not a good idea. It's just going to push more traffic to Beacon and Highway 17, which is already not having a good time with the left turns. We also looked at what happens if you signalize the intersection. That will pull some traffic from Beacon, but not as ideal for particularly Sydney and Ardwell Drive and the Lochside who's crossing across there. So we're suggesting that nothing happen to this intersection unless highways goes full grade separation at Beacon Avenue, in which case this intersection could be revisited. So these are recommendations for each of the intersections that failed, that were identified, and sort of an estimated timing of improvement. So we know that Beacon and Sterling is already failing today. And as we add development, that's only going to get more challenging. Galeran is doing all right now, as mentioned. But within 5 years, or about 25% of the development that we identified, it's going to need to be improved. And there's not a lot of benefit to improving Sterling and then closing it and realigning. That's the sort of focus and put everything into one intersection, one location with the realignment. And that's also part of what the Gateway land use was trying to do as well. So we're looking at a single lane roundabout in the short term, and longer term, reserving the land for a future 2-lane roundabout. McDonald Park Road and Mills, this is at about 75%, so about 15 years from now, if evenly split. And we have recommended signalization here. We did look at a roundabout. There's just not enough room to get a roundabout in that would facilitate the truck movements that we need at this intersection. And like I said, we suggested it at 75% build out of the area, but consideration could be to putting it in sooner if the multi-use path extending from Sandown comes in earlier to provide a controlled crossing across Mills Road. McDonald Park Road and John Road, which is the little road that comes off the rest stop area, right in this area. It fails in the long term, but it's only got about 20 cars. And there's really not a lot of redesign that could happen there without impacting ALR. So we're suggesting no changes at that location in the long term. West Senate Road and Mills Road in the longer term, trying to get off Mills Road to make this left turn where the truck is going to be challenging. It's going to be a level service E for 1 hour a day. It doesn't meet warrants for signalization in the long term, but North Saanich could consider 3-way stops at that, depending on what the future volumes look like at that intersection. Following the intersection improvements, we looked at each of the corridors and started with the West Side local area plan as our starting point for each of the corridor cross sections. So starting with McDonald Park North, the West Side plan basically had the path on the other side of the road, but the current direction from North Saanich's active transportation plan is to keep it on the west side. Along this fairly substantial drainage ditch, which they feel that they can deal with. This would extend from the existing path that goes along Sandown right now, and then ultimately would end up at Mills McDonald. On the east side, there would be a formalized sidewalk with boulevard and parallel parking formalized. The recommended option for south of Mills McDonald is to have an at-grade path on the east side, maintain the multi-use path on the west side, and add some green space and boulevards. There is a bit of a challenge with some of these mature trees. Either we could look at weaving around them or relocating and replanting them in the new landscaped area. And this would extend all the way around to Beacon Avenue. The east section of Mills Road, so again, here's Mills McDonald, is a 3-meter multi-use path on the north side. This connects the highway path with the flight path, formalizes the parking, and also provides a green space between the parking and the multi-use path. There will have to be a little bit of loss of green space as we meander around a few utility poles, but that's the general concept for Mills Road. Mills Road West, which is North Saanich, but we don't have any recommended changes. Active transportation is well accommodated here, and there's no intersections along the corridor that need significant change. Galaran. So this is, again, mostly based on the West Side local area plan. Nice wide sidewalk on the east side, a nice wide boulevard, formalized parking on both sides, and then a at-grade pathway on the west side. And then Henry Road, we sort of have two options here. They're very similar. The only difference is the location of the green space, whether it's between the parking and the sidewalk or along the property line. The benefit of option one is you can sort of keep that green space and use it for drainage and stormwater collection, versus option two. Now you would have water trapped along the sidewalk edge that would need a drainage system put in for. So probably option one is more preferred unless drainage substantially changes in this area with development. So I sort of talked about different build-out percentages and horizon years. So we took all of the land use, excluding the Sydney crossing, and divided it into basically 1 year increments, and then assessed everything at 25, 30, 35, and 40 years. If the project should happen to build out in the next 20 years, it's probably more like a 40-year plan, but we looked at it for traffic in a 20-year increment. But because we thought that there may be some stretching of timelines and or what development comes in, we've provided the town with a horizon year, a percentage build out, what land use generates that percentage of build out, as well as peak hour trips, because depending on what type of development comes in, you might get more residential doors at the end and more industrial up front, which might adjust those percentage build outs. So this gives staff a lot of options when assessing where they are in relation to the triggers. And so based on that, we've just summarized the implementation of these improvements. So less than 5 years or less than 25% build out. We're looking at Beacon and Galleran roundabout, realigning Sterling Way, and starting to upgrade Galleran and McDonald Park Road north of Mills Road. So starting to get those cross sections upgraded to start helping generate redevelopment in the area. 5 to 10 years, so getting up to the 50% build out of the area, continuing work along McDonald Park Road, Mills Road East, and Henry Road, so starting to fill into the neighborhood area. And lastly, long term would be the signalization and potentially the extra stop signs, at West Vantage Road and Mills Road. And just to touch back here for a second on if the Sydney Crossing Gateway project was included, many of these improvements identified in the short term would be reflective if that development had been added as well. It might just accelerate the timeline a little bit. And lastly, just because we've given timelines to these and suggested horizon years, if a development comes in, for example, the Sydney Crossing project, Sydney should definitely be getting those frontage improvements done to these standards by those developers. And whether it's that development or another one, starting to get those built in as they can. And with that, I will pass it back to Mayor and Council for questions.
Thank you, Ms. King. We certainly appreciate your presentation, and I'll just start a speakers list with my colleagues. I can't see everyone on the screen, so I'll just make a list. I have Councillor Garnett, and I can't see everyone on the screen, so if you just want to speak out, if you'd like to be on the speakers list.
Councillor Rentoul would like to be on the list.
Okay, and I see Councillor O'Keefe.
And maybe if she's finished with the presentation, we
take
can
it
take
off,
it
yeah.
down, and then we can see everybody.
Yeah, we may want to go back to a slide possibly, but I'll start with Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few questions and some comments. Thank you, Ms. King, for your presentation and for the work that you did. I will begin with a caveat that I work in that area. I've traveled to and from work both by bicycle and car, delivered in the area, have gone up and down that corridor many times for close to 15 years. So I've seen, I have a user's mentality when it comes to this area. So my first question is, you conducted the counts between August 27th and September 2nd. Is there a reason why you chose that particular week?
It happened to be when we decided to kick off the project. Most of the stuff was actually done in September as school went back in. So we hoped that it would kind of capture maybe the end of sort of tourist season and the beginning of school season as well, where people were going back to their normal routines.
Yeah, that was a bit of my concern because there's a significant amount of school traffic that takes place in that corridor daily. The AM and PM peak hours, can you tell me what time of the day that would have been approximately?
I believe the morning one is, I think we counted from 7 to 9, and the afternoon it was 4 to 5 to pick up the ferry arrival, particularly on the highway coming in from the 3 o'clock ferry.
So there was no midday or lunchtime observances done? I just bring that up because it's more than one day a week from Monday to Friday. The traffic will back up from the highway almost to Galaran, with many of the employees from the industrial zone going into Sydney for lunch. And that becomes a real, you think turning left is hard at other times off of Stirling. It's virtually impossible unless somebody's really nice. As far as the speed that you measured in that stretch of road, I want to say from Stirling to Galaran, were there posted signs? Were users aware they were being measured or monitored?
No, all that was there would have been 2 hoses on the ground. So if they were aware of what those did, they would know. But otherwise, no, we did not.
It's interesting because it's been my experience that certain times of the day the speed is generally a lot higher than that. It's been my experience anyway. So I find that interesting. But it's good. It's good because people will react to signs, and so that kind of skews your results. And I'm looking. I agree with your concept about you looked into having a signal at Stirling Way. And it could work based on the timing of the left turn and the coming out of Sydney, I think. But I've also thought, and you had no mention of that pedestrian crosswalk that crosses. And I've always thought that was a really not a great place for that crosswalk, simply because people turning left off of Stirling get in there, and not everybody pushes the light, and you're on a pedestrian before you see them. So I think the idea of moving Stirling up to Galaran would eliminate that potential risk, which is a good thing. Although I have some concerns about the density of traffic on Stirling now being shifted up to Galaran, so you have 4 spots where you have all that traffic and of course the big trucks. And further to your point about the growth in that area, and I was looking at the VAA spots, the 9 spots you indicated, and from my observations in the last little while, it looks like number 3, they're doing some underground work already, so I'm assuming that potential site might be coming sooner rather than later. And I noticed surveyors at the number 9 spot last week, actually. So I think those are 2 spots. And my concern around those is if they get developed sooner rather than later, they're right at that intersection. And not sure what's going in there, but the traffic volume is going to be impacted dramatically. And it's already a bit of a mess. So that's a worry for me. As far as the single, and saying about the signal light at Stirling, not doing it because you'd have to get rid of it eventually if you went to the realigning Stirling with the roundabout. So I'm wondering if you've given thought to, in terms of the fact of having 1 lane in a roundabout and 2, if we want to avoid long-term costs, I wonder if it might be more efficient to do the 2, just go right to 2 instead of, because if growth goes faster, it seems to me that there might be additional cost added on because things might cost more in 2 or 3 or 5 years as opposed to doing it all at once. Do you have a thought towards that?
Yeah, I would definitely build it to the outside edge to 2 lanes, and then you would have the option to either build the splitter island, or sorry, not splitter island, the center island. The apron where the trucks drive over. Sort of usually it's the brick area. Yeah. You could make that extra wide and keep it as a single lane in the short term, and then go back in and just take that out and re-asphalt it, and make some minor adjustments to the splitter islands. That tends to be the process for, if you want to ultimately go to a 2 lane but have 1 lane to start with, that's the least throwaway cost. The only thought we had for not going to 2 lanes right away was more a sensitivity of how confused people in the peninsula have been over the McTavish roundabouts and them being 2 lanes and not necessarily as busy as they're expecting. So it's a bit of a trade-off in terms of which way, but I'd say definitely build to the outside diameter of 2 lanes and, potentially just make your apron a bit bigger to start with.
Yeah, I was thinking also in terms of not having to go back and interrupting the neighborhood and businesses who may have time sensitive things they have to do. It's funny you would mention that, because I was thinking when I was looking at the roundabouts and thinking back to what we have already in here, and you mentioned it, and that is a concern for me too as far as safety, because we know the labyrinth that is the McTavish interchange has its many problems with accidents, but also previous to that being built at Willingdon and East Saanich, that has been, when it first went in, it was almost a daily occurrence of an accident, simply because people think if they're on the main roads, they get to go no matter what. And so that's my concern about a roundabout there as well, especially given the nature of the traffic that goes through there. And so it ties into, which is my last question. Was there any thought given to putting a signal light there with crosswalks as well around as an intersection at Sterling Way, or sorry, at Gallaran and when Sterling's joined in?
We didn't look at it. It probably could work as well as an alternative. The idea for the roundabout has been floated around for probably the last 20 years in that area. And based on the previous studies, it was sort of all the parties had sort of agreed to roundabout being the preferred option at that location.
I'm just thinking in terms of safety for pedestrians and cyclists and all vehicle users, residents, and employees that work in the area, having that knowing that you actually have to come to a stop and not risking somebody just flying through there. I think especially with those big trucks, I'm just thinking in terms of something long term and trying to avoid a serious injury or fatality for that matter, just based on my observations of 15 years and watching driving patterns and behaviors. So, but I appreciate your answers to questions, and thank you for bearing with my questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Ms. King, for your presentation. I've got a couple of comments, but while I'm making them, if you would open your presentation and go back to the development map, the Victoria Airport Authority, please. And while you're doing that, I'd just like to stress, I guess, a sense of alarm at how many of these items are fairly urgent in nature. 0 to 5 years seems to be a blink of an eye in this business, and there's a lot of work here that needs to be undertaken. And the reason I wanted to make that comment in the context of this particular screen is, or the slide is, just taking a look at the number and size of development opportunities on airport lands that will feed into this infrastructure. And my first question is, explain to me, please, the rationale in using the relationship of gross floor area to vehicular movements.
So, so the way that we project traffic for our developments is using the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation manual, and it provides us, I think it's, I'm going to say like 900, well, not even that many, maybe over 200 land uses. And over the last 40 years, we've been collecting data in North America on different land uses and how much traffic they generate. And so different organizations and people have submitted data over the years that say this size of building generated this much traffic and with this land use. And we've just been building and building on it across North America. It is the standard for figuring out the traffic projections, and they do tend to be generous. They don't tend to, typically don't underestimate traffic, is what I found in my 20+ year career. And so that's what we took the lot size, calculated a gross floor area for potential buildings based on land use, whether it was Sydney zoning, North Saanich zoning, or BAA zoning land use. And that gave us the gross floor area. And then we multiplied by the trip generation for that specific use. So whether it was industrial, aviation, commercial, or residential.
And so then for each of the zoning types, you're saying there's a different ratio, if you will, for vehicles. So that when I looked at this initially and I saw aviation services, say the first location versus location 9, which is listed as industrial, an airport hangar is going to have a lot fewer vehicles associated with it compared to, say, location 9. And I know Councillor Garnett mentioned he saw some activity on that parcel. What goes there in terms of the volume of traffic potentially, is going to be significantly different from aviation services. So you're saying that this is accounted for in that formula?
Yes. Yeah. And so speaking of that property, I know that there is some activity, and I'm sure you'll be seeing something in the near future on that, because we've been working in the background with VAA and others on that. The land use may vary even from what we projected here, and so ideally they should be giving you, as the town, here's our specific land use, here's our specific density, whether it's more or less than this, and here's what we expect our traffic is. And then you can use that table with the percentages of build out and the amount of total trips to be generated to help gauge if it's going faster or slower than we had projected.
So what you're indicating, what I take from that, is that there's some development in the works, but those vehicular movements that they're projecting have not been included in this exercise.
Not that specific development, but that lot has been included based on an industrial land use.
Lot 9. So you're saying lot 9, that the gross floor area of 15,684 is reasonable for what they're planned there?
I believe it is. Yeah, we've looked at it. It's not a crazy generator from what I recall, but it does generate some traffic. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'll leave my questions there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Turn to Councillor Keefe.
Thank you. Very interesting report. Thank you. And I'm going to focus on a couple of things that I don't know if they're perhaps related. So the congestion at Beacon and Highway 17. So people coming out of Sydney and turning left, which is an issue. Mm-hmm. And so wanting to reduce that. And then you also commented on the, you took a little bit of a look at the interchange by McDonald Park Road and Highway 17, where the Co-op gas station is. And then on the other side of the highway, I don't know if it's John Road there or sort of where the chamber is. And so what I'm wondering is, I know you kind of touched on it a bit, but I didn't hoist it all in. What I'm wondering is, could we reduce the congestion of traffic leaving Sydney on Beacon turning left onto the highway by allowing traffic on the north end of Sydney in that Ardwell sort of area the opportunity to access the highway to go south on the Pat Bay Highway? And I guess my observation has been, since I live in that area, there's been a fair amount of development in the new townhouses, multifamily or dwellings, that sort of thing. And what we start to see is a lot of traffic funneling through the neighborhoods in their quest to get out of Sydney. And I'm wondering if they had an opportunity to jump on the highway at that interchange, whether that would relieve some of that congestion and stress at Beacon and 17. If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yes. So I'll touch on a couple points. First is we didn't specifically, like we looked at the intersection and we did look at that left coming out of Beacon Avenue east, sorry, but not significantly. But I can say from past experience that yes, it's definitely a very busy left turn, and Beacon Avenue East itself is actually extremely busy in terms of volume of traffic, even compared to the highway. Yes, if you allowed left turns from McDonald Park Road onto Highway 17, you could help those movements and probably stretch out how long the beacon signal might last. The challenge will be that the ministry has expressed almost zero interest in putting a signal at this location, which is what would be needed to safely get people out of McDonald Park Road itself. And it would add more traffic potentially to Ardwell as people, come from Henry and further south and decide to, as you said, shift to the north to go south. So that potentially could be you might hear some more complaints, but I think the bigger barrier is the ministry just has very little appetite to add a signal on this section of Highway 17.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Other speakers? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. King, for your presentation. I do have a few questions.
Sure.
And the first is thank you for the acknowledgement of the former Sydney Crossing lands, the 10 acres and the square footage that you have added to the report. If I could turn to that airport map, and I'm looking at the one in the report with the numbers, and we have made reference, colleagues have made reference to those. And I would just seek clarification that number 2 would be referring to the existing or the Titan Boats development that's just completing.
Yes, I believe it does.
Okay.
I will definitely make a double check on that, but
okay,
yes,
so number 3 is actually, while it's placed at the end there, that piece of land south of Beacon Avenue West to the airport fence, if you will, is 2 lots, and so 3 is referring to the remainder of that lot.
Yes.
Okay. So number 2 has been added into the report at 47,000. Okay, thank you. So if we look in between number 1 and number 2. Under construction now is, I think it's being referred to as the Sydney Oil Response Center. And that's not active at the moment, generating traffic, but I don't see it noted on the map here. Was any consideration given to that?
Is that in location number 1?
Sorry, it's in between number 1 and number 2?
I will have to do a double check with VAA on that, but I will ask that. I am not 100% sure on that. These locations were a bit general from them, so I will ask if the Sydney Oil Response Center has been included as part of location 1 or not.
Yeah, it's just, okay, no, that would be helpful, because I think it is, some 10,000s of square feet. I don't want to take a guess at it.
Yeah. And I'll double check lot 2 as well while I'm at it.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I could then go back to, or go to the Sydney map that you did put up on the screen. And I would just make note, and I think there's a general awareness in the community, but this document is going to serve us for a number of years. And parcel G is actually within the airport lands.
Yes, so I didn't mention that. There is an overlap in Area G, and so we, the G that is listed here is sort of for the north part, and the location 9 is for the sort of the south part of that bigger chunk. So we did not duplicate land uses. We worked both with Sydney and VAA to identify the sort of max for that total area, being aware that it was sort of a duplicated area between both plans.
Okay, I was just thinking a footnote that is airport lands and subject to their land use guidelines versus the town of Sydney's.
Yeah.
I mean, we do have our zoning, but it's their land use guidelines. Okay, thank you for those clarifications. Turning to the McDonald Park Road, Highway 17, some of the conversation, and you did allude to the fact that Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure has kind of signaled, no pun intended, that they're resistant to any additions to that interchange. So it was of some note, or I took notice of on page 40 of your report, 5.1 under Highway 17 McDonald Park Road, that you spoke of the possible closure or what the impact would be of closure, but then you actually made reference to a full movement signalized intersection. And I'm just, I wouldn't want the public to have a false hope that that was an option for Sydney to pursue, in mitigating, the traffic impacts in this entire corridor. And if you were comfortable, I mean, you've alluded to it, but with what Modi has said in the past, whether some reference to a reluctance to or having no plans to provide signal at that location would help, be part of the record. Absolutely. Yes, and they reiterated that at the meeting we had last week with them, that they're looking to take this to a freeway standard, which means that they don't want signals on the highway. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thank you. The next, also staying on that map of Sydney, if we could for a moment. Or going back to it, sorry, for a moment. Oh. Hello? So down in the bottom right-hand corner is parcel P, which you've noted, and I'm sorry I didn't catch it the first time around, but that is the northwest corner of the intersection. It's approximately 2 acres, and some years ago, I believe in excess of 12 years ago, a commercial development was approved by the town. It was a gas station and convenience store. And it didn't proceed because part of the requirements would be a traffic circle at either Sterling or Gallerin, because Modi would not allow egress to the east out of that parcel. Fast forward those dozen or so years, and as we came into this term of office, we've had a couple of developers approach staff and myself and speak to a couple of different projects of interest on that 2 acres. But again, we had to refer them to Modi and the situation there. And so I think it actually is another factor to be considered, that here we have a 2-acre parcel that really, quite frankly, can't be developed to its potential without a proper egress from the property. Now, in substantive discussions, it may be a possibility that access actually to that property actually comes within the Gallerin neighborhood. But to date, with the expressions that have come forward, the limiting factor is that we don't have something at Sterling or Gallerin. The next, thank you for addressing the single versus double traffic circle. Sorry, I just trying to read my note here. So, in a sense, would it be fair to treat this document as a living document, given that we're expecting to see development, something come forward in the short term, but the airport has indicated that there are considerations they're giving now to different opportunities. That if it were a situation that a particular parcel was actually to develop more intensively than this was reasonably forecasted at this date, that it would actually accelerate and should be taken into consideration on any of these parcels that are opportunities for development. Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's what we tried to provide staff with this this table here. That kind of gives them a bit of, well, we estimated what, 654 trips is this, but, should that all come in a commercial development, and maybe it tips over into the 50%, then staff can say, okay, well, even though this is 20, 30, and 50%, you're generating this much traffic or close to it, we want the 50% improvements. Identified for intersections, or get up to this 75%, and Mills McDonald isn't a 15-year project; it's a 5-year project if something giant comes in, or cumulatively comes in, to keep an eye on.
but yeah, definitely a living document.
Thank you. I did recall now from this note what my last question was, and we spoke to the movements at the left turn movements at the highway intersection, Pat Bay Beacon Avenue, and if, for example, there were additional left turns of north and south onto Beacon Avenue West, has it been factored in what the impact of adding that additional turn lane onto Beacon Avenue West would be for congestion? I mean, is there some way that is factored in?
Yeah, so I apologize for the lighting. I'm in a LEED certified building and they keep turning our lights off on us because they think we're not here. Yes, it was factored in to having the dual lanes come off the highway. So taking Beacon Avenue at the intersection to basically a 2, 4, 5+ lane cross section. Yeah.
Okay, so that's good to know that premise was established when coming up with the recommendations.
Yeah, and it does fit as well, because that's always a concern. Is, you know, someone recommends a bunch of improvements and it doesn't fit in the right of way, but it does fit there, and there is enough room also on the highway to add the dual lanes as well.
Well, thank you again, Ms. King. We certainly appreciate your presentation, and I do see a councillor with an additional question. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, you've just your questions provoke questions for me. Thank you, Ms. King. I'm curious, with that potential 2 lanes coming off of Beacon or off of the highway onto Beacon, are there any, how I want to phrase this, anything put in place to accommodate or assist the 10 residents that live on Beacon Avenue there in terms of getting out of their driveways if there's that much of an increase in traffic?
Nothing was looked at specifically. If the roundabout goes in, obviously that it's not necessarily ideal, but they could, you know, if it's difficult to turn left in those peak, you know, AM, midday, afternoon peaks, they could use the roundabout to U-turn and to make the right and then go back towards Beacon Avenue. That will be a short-term challenge for sure, particularly if the Sydney Crossing site does develop, you know, what to do with those 10 houses. And, but yeah, they will tend to be fairly low traffic, but there could be complaints from them in the short term.
And one last question, if I may, brought up through other people's questions. You mentioned Modi wants to keep it a freeway, and they're not entertaining putting a signal light. So I guess that leads to the question, what about the Beacon Patway Highway intersection? If they don't want signal lights and they want it to be a freeway, what are the prospects of that being changed or altered in some fashion?
Not to directly speak for them, they did indicate that they will continue to follow their highway corridor studies and recommendations. And from the 2012, it was identified for Beacon to be an interchange of some sort. This was the last sort of kick that they did. Yeah. I do believe it's still in their long-term planning. The timing of that, I could not speculate on, but I believe their intent is to continue moving forward with more interchanges on Highway 17.
And I would assume that their studies would also indicate the deficiencies that your studies have shown that exist at that intersection. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. And Ms. King, thank you again for the presentation, but also for taking our questions in depth. And we appreciate having you present this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Council, we do know that there is an agenda item with regards to the staff report on this study, which we will come to in a little bit. So turning to our next item on the agenda is bylaws. And we have 2 to consider this evening. The first is bylaw number 2212, our financial plan for 2021 to 2025. Council had full deliberations over several weeks and approved the budget. And we requested staff bring forward this financial plan bylaw. And we can, through 4 motions, give readings and adoption as we choose this evening.
I'll move bylaw number 2212 be given first reading.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous.
I'll move it be given second reading.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, those in favor? Motion carries unanimous.
Move third reading.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous.
Move adoption.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now turn to bylaw number 2213, which is our miscellaneous fees and charges bylaw, and an amendment number 19. We have a report from staff, and I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a periodic amendment to our fees and charges bylaw, which captures a lot of the miscellaneous fees that aren't included in any other topical bylaw. The purpose of the amendment is to change the rates for the Tallista boat launch, which have not been increased since 2012. So the operation and maintenance, as well as the parking enforcement costs since 2012 have increased, but the fees have not done likewise, and we're just trying to bring it into better alignment with the financial demands of the boat launch. We did do a survey of South Island boat launches to see whether the rates we're proposing would be reasonable, and they are in the ballpark that we noticed. So the purpose of the we're proposing a $12 launch fee or $180 per year. The purpose of this fee is so that anyone using the boat launch can not only launch their boat, but potentially park in one of the permitted spaces for boat launch purposes. And on the revenue side, we're hoping to build up the boat launch reserve, which is used to pay for major maintenance at the facility, as well as occasionally for other waterfront capital projects. With that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe with questions before we consider motions.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so question for Mr. Hissick. I did get some information from Mr. Hissick regarding, I didn't realize that there was so much maintenance required there. So it's not just the floats, but the paved area, the ramped area, and the small breakwater there, the pilings that need maintenance as well. And there has been a great amount of interest in the boat launch and the conditions of the floats there. So when I looked at this, I was interested to ensure that the increase in the fees was going to cover future maintenance. And maybe if Mr. Hissick could comment on how confident he is in terms of this increase in fees will help to ensure that we have the money that we need to make all those changes or that maintenance in the future.
Thank you, Councillor. For the duration of the current financial plan, we're projecting that it'll be sufficient, and we're going to be looking at some of the longer term impacts, such as the breakwater and the pilings. But through the projects that are included in the current plan, and as well as the anticipated revenues over the next 2 years, we will be okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll just briefly echo some of the theme from Councillor O'Keefe's comments. And likewise, I think we've all seen some concern expressed in the community around the maintenance of the floats and the schedule and concerns there. So I'm very pleased to see that there's not capacity in the budget that has typically been utilized for this purpose to address that for this boating season, but that the intent is there certainly to have it done during the off season next and have it in place for boating season in 2022. If that's not the case, then council obviously can address that in budget season to ensure that it is. I think because there's been no adjustment since 2012 that this is reasonable. I'll certainly support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Seeing no further discussion, we can proceed with this through 4 readings as we wish.
I'll move that bylaw number 2213, amendment number 19, get first reading.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous.
Move second reading.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, those in favor? Motion carries unanimous.
Move third reading.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous.
And move adoption.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Garnett. We'll next turn to development permits and development variance permits. We have one this evening, development variance permit application number DV 100299 at 10364 Albay Road to relax the front yard setback to construct a deck in what is considered the legal front yard. This did come before council at a previous meeting where we deliberated and recommended or directed staff to post notice to the neighborhood. We have had one written submission from a neighbor who lives across the street in one direction who is in full support, and we do have a recommendation.
I'll move that the application be approved.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Next, we'll turn to adoption of our regular council meeting minutes from March 22nd.
Move adoption.
We have it moved,
Second.
seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. I'll next turn to the mayor's report. I'll be brief tonight. Just want to thank staff for taking the initiative to bring the changes to our agenda package. It serves staff more efficiently in terms of preparing agendas, and I think it serves council and certainly the public better in that there are improvements on our website for those who are joining a live webcast or viewing a webcast after the meeting in conjunction in being able to see the agenda items as well as our the recording of our meetings. So thank you to staff for taking that initiative. We appreciate it. I'll next turn to our council reports. I'll begin with Councillor Garnett with his updates from the Shaw Centre and Mary Winspear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll begin with a brief update on the Memorial Park Society. Attended the last board meeting on March 23rd, and the following budget has been put forward for 2021. They've broken into 3 4-month periods. January to April, they budgeted for an income of $234,500 with a deficit of $24,596. May to August, they budgeted for income of $343,000 with a surplus of $30,904. And September to December, they budgeted for an income of $390,000 with a surplus of $513,500. In terms of capital replacement, the main item being replaced for 2021 is the reader board, which you may or may not have noticed has not been functioning for a while. They plan to do some improvements with it, but they are projecting that it'll stay within the requirements under the bylaw for what signs can be and the brightness. If they need any alterations to it, they will approach us for a variance, but they're not expecting that'll be needed. So that'll be a nice replacement because it's kind of weird driving through and not seeing anything on there. The Mary Winspear Centre was fortunate to be named as a mass vaccination site, as many of you now know, and to date it has been seamless. The advantage the site has is the accessibility is provided for the older demographic, which was first up. And I heard several comments that UVic was another site and there was issues for people with accessibility. So it's a good kudos to our community. The contract runs from March 2nd until the end of September. They first visited the site and were told that they would get back to them in a few days. And in fact, they actually returned a phone call the next day. They were so impressed with how they ran the facility and how it would meet their needs for what they needed to accomplish. So it's very impressive. They've received people from Glanford, Broadmead, Prospect Lake, Central Saanich, North Saanich, and Sydney. I spoke to Mr. Edgett on Friday, and depending on how many doses they get, they're averaging 350 to 800 people a day being vaccinated. I spoke to a volunteer there before the meeting, and she was from Saanich, and she informed me at the time that they had no person had been vaccinated had any reaction at all. So far it's gone extremely well. I also spoke people in the community know who you are, and a person I spoke to had mentioned to me that they'd been vaccinated and how well the whole experience was and how impressed they were, which I passed along to Mr. Edgett and passed to the staff, just how well they were accommodating people and getting everything done in a timely fashion. Excellent work on their behalf. And the contract provided a much needed economic boost to the center. And just as a heads up, they've also been approved for an election voting site whenever the election is called. So that's on the horizon for them as well. And that's that report. The same day I attended a board meeting for the Shaw Center for the Salish Sea, March 23rd. So these are some of the numbers from them. So from January 1st to February 28th, revenue from admissions was at 58% of 2020. Membership sales was at 78% of 2020. And retail sales was at 59% of 2020. Net earnings for the 9 months covering June 1st, 2020 to the end of February 2021 was $114,112, which was significantly higher than the continuity plan forecast of a loss of $23,362. This was due to the better than forecasted earned revenue from admissions, membership sales, and retail sales, and they also had some generous donations from our community. At this point in time, the center is forecasting a year-end surplus of $26,762, which is pretty amazing given everything that's been going on, and considering they're only open 5 days a week as well. Most of this was earned revenue from the first 3 months of the year, but it is worth noting that both the federal wage subsidy and the Town of Sydney support were critically important in this regard. Just a small note, there's been 82 new volunteer applications since the pandemic began, which is, again, impressive given everything and the people's fears that people are willing to step up and help out when they knew they needed it is a very impressive thing. The sand filter midlife cycle repair and upgrade project is now 100% complete. It was scheduled for 2020, but given everything going on, it's took some time, but it's done, and it's an important piece of infrastructure there. And some of my fellow councillors would be happy to know that both doors are now fully accessible. So that was one of the things they highlighted they need to get done, and they've done that. And finally, the strategic plan, which originally scheduled to be released on June 1st, has been extended 6 months and will now be released at the AGM in November. This decision was made to provide a longer public consultation period and to avoid conflicting with the Town of Sydney OCP public engagement. And that's all from me, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to colleagues if you have any questions for Councillor Garnett. Seeing none, thank you for those two very positive reports. I'll next turn to Councillor O'Keefe with an update from SIP.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I recently attended the SIP Partners Committee. So just a reminder on what that is. So each of the member municipalities send an elected representative from their councils and to collaborate on things of mutual interest as they relate to economic development. The focus on the committee is morphing a bit. They're trying to look at ways that we can work together on common issues related to economic development. Some ideas bantered around so far has been the clean economy, the blue economy, exchanging ideas and initiatives for workforce housing. So over the next little while, we're going to spend some more time on thinking what those things might look like, but also wanting to be conscious that we don't duplicate things that the CRD is already doing. One of the things that I think is of most interest to us will be their initiative about community profiles. And I did mention this a little while ago that it was something they were thinking of doing, and they are moving ahead with this now. So what these community profiles will be is an online portal that will be created by SIP and maintained by SIP, and it will include your basic socioeconomic information like demographic, workforce info levels, other sorts of what they refer to as assets. So like tourism assets. So for example, where the location of the Shaw Center, the museum, that sort of thing. Also recreation assets, transportation assets, and very specific information about companies. So where, Viking Air, or not Viking Air, but, companies within Sydney, say on the west side, not just that there's a company there, but what they actually do. So this is information that would be of use to local businesses in terms of perhaps expansion plans, and also for potential investors who are wanting to, say, relocate to a place like Sydney and gather some information on whether our community would suit their needs. Where we're going with it next is SIP will be meeting with our CAO, mayor, myself, and staff in the next couple weeks to give staff an overview about what the project will involve. Next, they'll want to engage with stakeholders such as the Chamber, the SBIA, EAC, I think would also be a good group to consult with. And they're hoping to have the profiles completed by the end of the summer. The good thing is there's no cost to do this. They've hired a consultant with the money. If anybody's wondering where our money goes to SIP, here's one thing that we're getting some value from. They will also maintain it in the future, so we don't have to worry about gathering data, updating data. They will do that, but they will provide a portal from our website for people to access. A few other just updates. Some coming events on April 15th. So this week they're hosting a webinar about reopening the Canada-US border. I think that'll be of interest. They're also on May 20th, a presentation called The Last Mile of the Pandemic and What You Need to Know. And you can sign up for those if they're open to anybody, and you can sign up for those on their website. And yeah, that's it for me, unless anybody has questions.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Turn to colleagues, and we should have mentioned at least once that SIP is the South Island Prosperity Partnership.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate your update. Thank you. Next, we'll go to committee reports, and the first, I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, one of three councillors on the committee, with regards to minutes and recommendations. Councillor Wainwright.
I'll move receipt of the minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, just some questions for the committee. First of all, just want to say how much I appreciate all the work the committee has done so far. There's a lot to look at, and you seem to be doing a pretty good job at gathering all the info together. I also note your comments and concerns about in regards to public consultation and not wanting to go out more than once, and so gathering all the appropriate information so you can do it right the first time. And so my question relates to that. And I guess in my mind, I see that there's two major things that we would want to gather from people. First of all, their thoughts on what they actually want to see on the waterfront. So are they looking they want to see a wharf that has restaurants, or do they just want to leave it open? Do they see it perhaps like a Granville Island market sort of setup? Do they want to have space for transient boaters coming in, places to launch canoes, all that kind of stuff? So the aspect of finding out from them what sort of amenities and things that they would like to see. And then the other thing is the cost. And so what I'm wondering is, when we're going out for public consultation, will we be able to bundle those things together so that you can say to people, okay, if we do this type of structure, here's the things that you could have there. You could have restaurants or retail or I don't know what, but if you did this type of structure, it would have this. And I guess what I'm thinking is that would allow people to make decisions about, well, I would like to have this, that, and the other thing, but I see that type of structure is going to cost a whole lot of money. And so although I'd like those things, I'm not in favor of that, bearing the costs. So just trying to get a sense of whether we'll be able to gather that sort of info from the public.
So I'll turn to any of the three members. Councillor Wainwright? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, as is mentions in our progress report, we're anticipating bringing a separate report in the near future on the public engagement and what we would be proposing to do with that. I think our thinking is generally along the lines of we see there's a short list of options that we're working on developing, and you can see that in the minutes and the progress report. We actually had a meeting after the progress report, and the short list is actually a little smaller as a result of that. But our thinking is that we would present those 4 options and all the supporting information that we've got about those options to the public for their input. And in terms of what they're going to be paying attention to, obviously costs is going to be a pretty significant thing. I know there is interest in the amenities, but the visual aspects look like they're going to be very significant. And because we're dealing with sea level rise, and these are typically going to be higher than, well, the option of removing the wharf, of course, doesn't have any concerns about that, but pile structure would be higher than the current wharf, and there would be a need to modify the surrounding landscape to ensure that there's a ramp up to the wharf and that it's tied in properly to the general surrounding area. And we haven't 100% got those details sorted out, but the visual aspects of the structure and how it ties into Beacon Park and the surrounding area are probably pretty significant. So at the end of the day, we're simply going to present all the information that we've got, covering the range of things we think people will be concerned about, and we'll be looking for them to provide input. And we're not going to tell them, here are the 2 things you should be looking at. We're simply going to cover the whole scope. As you can see from our progress stuff, it looks like the environmental aspects of the different options are relatively comparable. We're thinking that probably is not going to be a major decision factor. But on the other hand, we'll have to see what the public says.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And just one other, I think we maybe touched on it before in regards to the adjacent marina. And I just wondered whether the committee would be chatting with them prior to us going out for public consultation to find out what their plans might be. And I don't know whether their plans might impact the type of structure that you would propose. So I'm thinking, for example, like with the lease agreement with the marina, they had talked about the possibility of having space for a ferry or transient boaters, canoe access, different things like that. So is that something that you would, is it relevant to chat with them first, or would you just do that as part of the basic public consultation?
I think our expectation was that it would be addressed as part of that overall public engagement. We're not aware of any plans for expanding the marina as far as Beacon Wharf, at least not in the near future. We are certainly looking at the idea of transient moorage in association with the wharf, and that is the kind of thing we're looking at as amenities, and whether that's possible or not with the different options.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ryan. And so we do have the motion to receive the minutes on the floor. Any further discussion? Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Councillor Wainwright?
And I guess I'll move receipt of the progress report.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And I'll turn to Councillor Rentoul with regards to the Advisory Planning Commission meeting of April 6th.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move the minutes be received.
Second.
Discussion? Those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you.
Also move the recommendation on behalf of the APC that the development permit application number DP 100819 to permit the construction of a 2.5-story multifamily residential townhouse development be approved, subject to the following conditions. One, that the property owner address design guideline 20.3.9 garbage and recycling areas to the satisfaction of the senior manager of current planning. And two, that prior to issuance of building permit, the property owner shall A, register a restrictive covenant on the title of the property prohibiting the future strata council from passing any bylaws that may restrict occupancy of the building based on age, and B, pay to the town a deposit in the amount of 115% of the estimated costs to complete the hard and soft landscaping for the development.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments that APC members made in their record of decisions, and there's some good points there about density, and I'll be thinking about that as we carry on with our OCP discussions. The thing that continues to be an issue with me is with this particular application is the issue of accessibility. And so it's hard for me to approve this, an accessible unit, when the person living there does not have full accessibility to their entire premises. And as the way I understood it with the presentation is, person living here, say if they have mobility issues, if they want to enjoy their front yard patio, they need to take the elevator down to their carport. Then they have to find a way, a person who has a mobility challenge then has to go around their house, come up the front sidewalk in order to access their own patio. So that's just not acceptable. And so I won't support this for that reason. And I hope we can start paying a bit more attention, or the developers, to that sort of thing in the future. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed. The motion carries. Councillor O'Keefe, the motion carries. Thank you, Councillor Rentoul. We'll now turn to staff reports, and the first is the staff report on the Beacon West traffic study. We had the presentation earlier this evening. I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Ms. Clary, good evening.
Evening, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nadine did a very thorough job of providing information on this report, but this is a traffic study that was a partnership between Sydney, North Saanich, and the airport, and MOT as well. There are many recommendations as identified in the staff report. There's and that Nadine pointed out is Highway 17 at Beacon Avenue requires some improvements there. However, it is in MOT's jurisdiction, and therefore town staff have limited influence over implementing those recommendations. Several of the other recommendations are already on the books, or staff were already aware of them through either the Gateway proposed development that was in the works, or for example, the improvements on Galaran, those are already scheduled for 2023. The corridor upgrades to McDonald Park Road. Staff are already working with North Saanich to implement some of those. So some of the short-term ones are already in the books, and with the exception of the roundabout and Sterling, which we're aware of, but need some planning and looking at how exactly that could be implemented. And yeah, at this point, we're just looking to receive this study for information. Nadine will be going back and updating it to include the Sydney Crossing site, and also make a couple other minor adjustments. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for staff, and I wonder, is there anything in this traffic study we should be referring to the OCP? Because the OCP is supposed to be covering transportation in terms of sort of major infrastructure upgrades, and there are some recommendations about redesignating from collector to arterial, and it would seem maybe that some of the works that are being discussed might be worth mentioning in the OCP. At any rate, just a question.
Might need to refer to Mr. Newcomb on that one.
Mr. Newcomb.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely read the study through, and we'll be using it as we start to draft the plan over the summer. If council wants to make a resolution to that effect, happy to have it in writing, but we will be doing that anyway, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you. I don't see the need to do it formally.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions, Councillor Rintoul?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps not a question, but an opportunity for staff to provide comment. I certainly understand the staff seeking receipt for information on this traffic study. I'd like to see it go a step further, and that's only because I feel there's some urgency here. And so I'd rather see a motion also include the prospect of facilitating a task force and asking staff to at least be the catalyst for a discussion with the airport, with North Saanich, and with Ministry of Transportation around this. Not suggesting that the town of Sydney would need to take the lead on it, but I feel there's an urgency here, and looking to formulate a task force as one of the outcomes at this stage, I think is probably important that we expedite the conversation, not least of which because we recognize through the discussion that there's additional development on the airport lands anticipated. So I'll leave that comment. If staff have any concerns with it, please let me know, or let council know. But I'd like to see something a little broader at this point than the receipt for information.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Mr. Humble would like to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, through to Councillor Rintoul, I think it's a great idea. I think it certainly makes sense and has a degree of merit. In particular, what we've heard tonight about the level of VA development and the potential of what's coming down the pipe. The challenge that I see, however, currently is one around capacity and resources that staff have currently in terms of being able to undertake and take a leadership role with respect to a task force. But I think it's important enough that we give it some serious thought, and what I might suggest is that council give consideration to maybe referring the matter to staff to look at, come up with maybe some options for consideration, and bring a report back to council so that council can consider what those options might be. What I might suggest, if we're looking at a task force element, and I think if we're going to undertake a task force, I do think that the town will likely end up taking a leadership role, perhaps maybe in conjunction with the VAA. But I would like to maybe bring a report back that looks at maybe what other potential projects that we have currently on the books that we might be able to postpone, defer, eliminate, so that we can make room for what I think is an important project.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. And I'll just, so these were questions of Ms. Clary. Is there any further questions? And we do have a motion. We don't have a motion yet on the floor. So I see no further questions. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move that Council receives the Beacon West traffic study for information, and that staff report back to Council on recommended next steps.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Discussion, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had certainly intended to go a little further with respect to that motion and some specificity around a task force and parties to that task force, but taking in consideration Mr. Humble's comments, I think staff understand the intent that it's just an item that clearly, as a result of this traffic study, I think we recognize needs to be prioritized. So I'm satisfied with staff coming back with perhaps an array of options, as Mr. Humble suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Yeah, I also felt that there was a lot of stuff in that report, and I felt it needed a little bit more extra attention in terms of giving staff a little bit of extra time to go through it, and rather than it just sort of being a reference document to refer as projects come up in the future to be sort of, I guess, proactive or taking a look at it to see how can some of these things fit into our current plans, some sort of priorities. It's been identified that perhaps there's elements that should be referred to the OCP for consideration, how we're going to consult with North Saanich and the airport on some of these things. So I think that's a good approach to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll add a comment or two. I'm supportive of the motion, and I think it's been a success earlier in the term that Sydney was able to, Mr. Humble and I were able to approach, and Councillor Rintoul, as our liaison to the Airport Authority, approached the Airport Authority and approached North Saanich, and we came to the partnership and shared the cost of $60,000 for this report. And I think it's provided valuable information for the three parties, and it was also, I think, successful to have Modi participate in it. And I think we want to carry some momentum in terms of the partnership, and I think while the staff report clearly indicates that this information will be considered during future development proposals, whether they're on VA lands or in Sydney lands, that they intend to bring forward during future budget deliberations. And as Mr. Humble spoke to, there needs to be consideration of other projects that are already scheduled in that area in terms of priorities. And then the third part of Ms. Clary's report is have informed discussions with stakeholders, and I think that's where this motion takes us to continue those discussions, and look forward to the report coming from staff. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, staff. Next, we'll turn to approach options with regards to developing an economic development strategy. We have a report from staff, and I'll turn to Mr. Humble to introduce, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this report addresses some potential options for establishing an economic development strategy for the town. This was based upon a resolution from Council back at the March 2nd special Council meeting regarding budgets. But Council allocated $60,000 from the Safe Restart funds to develop an EDS, Economic Development Strategy. And at that time, Council also requested the staff report back to Council on what might be deemed next steps for developing the EDS. So staff see two viable options for advancing this particular project. One option involves sort of developing the sort of standard detailed request for proposals inviting qualified consultants to submit proposals for the development of the economic development strategy. So again, that's the fairly standard approach that we would typically take. A second and alternative approach is that staff reach out to the South Island Prosperity Project, SIP, to consider whether or not they would be interested in undertaking an approach that they took with respect to the township of Esquimalt in developing their economic development strategy, and they refer to it as the Business Investment Roadmap 2020. So SIP basically took a leadership role with the township of Esquimalt in developing their economic development strategy. They worked with the township to hire a consultant, and they collaborated with the consultant and the township in developing an appropriate framework that worked for the municipality. So it's an option for council to consider a similar approach, and we would certainly have to reach out to the organization to see if they'd be interested in working with the town in developing our economic development strategy. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mahumble. And we do have options in our staff recommendation. Councillor O'Keefe.
I'll move the staff recommendation that council approves option 2, that staff approach SIP to consider their interest in working with the town to establish an economic development strategy, including taking the lead in selecting a potential consultant and general oversight of the process.
You have that moved?
Yes.
Sorry, that's moved. I'm waiting for a seconder.
Second.
We do have a seconder. Any further discussion? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just seeking a little clarity from staff. Reading on the page 2 of the report, it's important to note that staff expect that regardless of which of the aforementioned options is selected, the EAC will likely provide an important contributing role in the development of an EDS. And I'm trying to equate that with the designation in the financial binder that says the work will be coordinated by the EAC, but will require professional consulting assistance. I'm not sure if those two things jive for me, or if I'm just some clarity around whether or not that still functions along the same thing.
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, the budget document had our best estimate of what would happen at the time, but this approach report trumps what was in the budget document as new information.
Oh, okay, I just want to be comfortable with what the EAC's expectations are, given what we discussed earlier, and if it flows well. That's all my biggest concern. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, those in favour? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Humble. We'll turn to item 13C, which is our monthly building permit reports. We have them for both February and March 2021.
Move receipt for information.
Second.
We have it moved in second. Any discussion? Councillor Fallon.
Thank you. On page 1 of 1, or I guess it's page 171, the Mills Road development, I see that was approved in November of 19, and they have until December 21st of this year to do something. Just curious if we have any indication from them where they are on that project, if that's happening or on hold.
I'll turn to staff. Ms. Verhagen.
Through the mayor to Councillor Fallett, we have not received a building permit application for that project yet. That could be related to the pandemic and its impact on care facilities. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Call a question in favor. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now turn to our correspondence, and as per the amendment to the agenda, we have two items under 14A. They actually both letters came from an email from the city of Courtenay. One was with regards to the PACE BC campaign, and one was with regards to the Help Cities lead campaign, and I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I know. I wanted to move this one up just because I noted within his second letter about the PACE BC program that this was for building retrofits and for energy improvements there. And since we put forward quite a lot of money for BC Hydro, or to top up with the BC Hydro retrofits, I felt like this seemed like something, that particular program might be one that would be helpful for Sydney to move something forward in our climate plan, although we haven't got our climate employee or climate manager to help us go through the plan that we have and see where it's missing something. But I feel this was something that would have been identified on our plan all those years ago, was about trying to get a higher uptake of energy retrofit for residential buildings. Now, what they've requested, PACE BC is requesting letters from local governments, and I don't know if we're a local government that wants to do that, if we see such a large benefit that we'd actually join this campaign. But I just wanted to kind of open it up for other councillors to think about how this might fit with our climate plan, and whether staff had any opinions on that program in particular, or possibly the other ones from HELP, or that the Help Cities Lead is putting forward. But I looked at those and thought, for a town our size, they looked kind of like a bureaucratic nightmare. But PACE is something that could probably be easily implemented, that would not take a lot of our staff time, and would be simple for the province to put in place to allow us to do. So if Peter's already got comments, but and if staff had comments as well, they'd love to hear from them. So thank you.
Okay, I have a comment, but I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, and if staff wishes to comment. Councillor Wainwright.
I would also agree. I think the PACE program is something that would benefit Sydney a lot, and it does sound like something that would be reasonable. The one thing in particular, if the PACE program could be available to business, it might give them, like, we have, in fact, it's our commercial buildings in particular that are some of the more aging buildings, and it's the older buildings are the ones that are in greatest need of these energy refits. To provide a vehicle where they might be able to help finance that through taxes just opens up one more option, one more tool that people could use to make some of these improvements. So yeah, it definitely sounds like something that is worth exploring. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. My comments are that in looking this in the package, there are the two different letters, and I'm actually going to turn to the Help Cities Lead for just a moment. And just for members of the public who may be watching, the Help Cities Lead is an education and awareness campaign working to build support for more focused collaboration between the province and local governments on building climate policy. And the campaign team at Help Cities Leads identified 5 regulatory measures where additional authority would be helpful to municipalities in accelerating climate action. And so it then lists in the information we have the five regulatory measures. One of those 5 regulatory measures is the PACE initiative that councillors have spoken to. I'm personally in favor of supporting the request to write to ministers in support of all 5 initiatives, which would include PACE. Not necessarily that we would enact them all or choose to enact them all in Sydney for practical reasons or reasons of priority, but that to be supportive to other municipalities that are interested in this. I think supporting climate adaptation measures in our neighboring municipalities is a supportive thing, and there is the possibility of some benefit to us, particularly with PACE, but there may be in the other 4 measures sometime down the road. So the request was for Council's consideration is that we endorse the Help Cities Lead campaign by writing to the ministers, and by that it's those 5 initiatives, one of which is the PACE campaign. So I'll take direction from council whether they wish to support the 5 or whether they choose just the pace. Or none at all. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. My thoughts are, I think it all sounds good, sort of, but I guess I don't know enough about it at this point in time. I think Councillor Duncan's point about it would be nice if we had a climate change coordinator who could receive these things and other things and translate them for us. I'm always conscious of being a little bit concerned about lobbying for things that I don't have enough information except for some pages in front of me. I don't know what the feelings are of the construction industry. I don't know if that's a factor or not. I think it's a good idea. I'm just frankly not sure which route to go at this point. So I'd be interested to hear what others have to say. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing a motion come to the floor. Councillor Duncan?
I was going to say, as the mayor and the one who usually ends up having these letters sent from his office, if you're in favor of writing the letter, I definitely support you to write the letter to support whichever campaign you like. I have some hesitancy, I guess, for some of the same reasons Councillor Keefe brought up about supporting all of the initiatives of Help City Lead, and that some of them, when I look at them, I wonder about the knock-on effects to housing affordability. And I just wonder if they fully understand about electricity loading in peak resources. But on the other hand, they're all optional. And so if cities want to perform the experiment of trying them and seeing what that does and whether that helps things or makes things worse in other respects, and they realize they can't move forward with it, then I guess that would be something, we can try. So, I am in favor of a letter then to support the Help Cities Lead, and give other municipalities that choice as well then.
Okay, I'll take that as moved.
Second.
And seconded. Further discussion? Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll next go to item 14B, which is the 2020 annual report from the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee. Councillor Fallot is our liaison to that committee, and we do have a recommendation.
Thank you. I'll move the recommendation to receive for information.
Second.
We've moved and seconded. Councillor Fallot?
Just like to speak briefly to it. First of all, I apologize for the poor copy, both online and in print. There is some fuzziness so I apologize for that. But I am pleased to note that we did whittle our 60 to 80 page historical annual reports down to just over 20. So the committee is improving. And just a quick update, the committee is, as council will remember, has undergone a review by the CRD, and we are working with Mr. Steve Carey, who's the manager of legal services, who's very kindly availed himself to go through the report from the CRD, and that we're working on it, and hopefully we'll have some recommendations to send back to the CRD board by September. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to, but otherwise we have the report in front of us.
Thank you for the update, Councillor Fallot. Any questions? Seeing none, those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Next, I'm going to turn, we have 2 items on the support for default speed limit reduction pilot. The first is a letter from the Capital Regional District, and we have a recommendation.
Move receipt for information.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I'll just comment briefly. This committee, as colleagues might recall, I sat on the committee for 2 years and was chair in 2020. And we were just receiving presentations from the project leads out of Saanich and the consultant and this letter is just showing their support for the speed reduction pilot. And with that, if there's no discussion, I'll call a question. Those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. In the second item, we have letters from the District of Saanich dated March the 4th and March the 24th. And we have a staff recommendation to refer to staff for a report. However, staff may wish to comment, and I was going to suggest to council they consider that we have a lot of information provided in our agenda package from the District of Saanich in terms of how they came to take their decision to alter the speed from 40 to 30K, and that if I could perhaps ask for a comment from staff whether they are generally in support or they would prefer of the request from Saanich and a pilot at 30K, or whether if either council has questions that staff would need to come back and answer, or if staff has an indication of their support. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think from a staff perspective, I think we are in support of what's being proposed in terms of the moving forward with a further reduction from 40 kilometers to 30 kilometers. We already have a number of streets within Sydney that fall within the proposed deferred speed limit of 30 kilometers an hour. So from a staff perspective, we support it. Certainly we can report back to council or if that's the desire, but alternatively, we're happy if council decides that they have enough information and they're prepared to simply endorse this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll turn to council for direction. Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to endorse this evening and would be content to move a motion to see Sydney signal its interest to alter the pilot to 30 kilometers per hour from 40.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Councillor O'Keefe, and then Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. So I'm not in favor of this. A lot for some of the same reasons I had last fall. The purpose of a pilot, of course, is to test a concept, to see whether we can improve on something. And so that's, speed. And I'm not going to argue, of course, that speed can have more serious issues when there's a car accident or bikes or people involved. However, what I'm concerned about in terms of participating in the pilot is whether we can actually add any significant data to the pilot and have some information for ourselves or the people who were doing the pilot to see whether we actually improved. And so I'm reflecting back on our initial discussions on this in November. And at that time, my understanding was that we didn't really have any data available within the town in terms of how was speed, excess speed, impacting us, aside from anecdotal information. So my recollection is we didn't have data or on how many accidents there had been related to speed, or if we did, there were very few. So, and, we have anecdotal information, in my neighborhood, close to Sidal, about people complaining about speeding. But it's hard to use anecdotal information in a pilot to say, well, we had so many people that thought it was an issue before, and now there's less people. Anecdotal information is difficult because it's often a matter of perception. In our package tonight, we had a letter from an individual complaining about they thought that the speed on Lochside Drive was excessive. And when you looked into it, you know, RCMP came back and said, actually, it's not really all that bad. So I don't think anecdotal information is a good thing to rely on. The other thing that I had an issue with is that force enforcement is also an issue. So the RCMP have said they will continue to focus their attention on what they see as the high priority areas, high crash sites, and that sort of thing. So, and I guess I'm just concerned about, you know, focusing our staff's energy on this pilot when it's something that I don't know that we're going to have a return on investment in the end. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If I could speak for a moment to address some of those concerns. The information that's been brought forward has not indicated that they would be relying on anecdotal information. They've indicated that they will look to achieve a baseline before implementing. And this is a pilot to try and improve safety, perceived safety for pedestrians, cyclists, other active transportation users in our neighborhoods. It's a pilot project to gather information. We now have the City of Victoria and the District of Saanich both agreeing to participate at 30K. That's roughly half the population of Greater Victoria. And as Mayor Haynes indicates in his covering letter, that he's inviting other municipalities, even if they're smaller, to participate, because we have a range of neighborhood types within the region, and that participating will help in the collection of data around the region. With regards to enforcement, the police services have indicated that that they would not be able to provide additional enforcement, you know, because of the speed pilot. Well, additional enforcement isn't necessarily required. If the existing enforcement is applied, you're going to have your baseline, and you will have your data that comes from the project. Saanich has agreed when the 5 municipalities, Sydney, North Saanich, Central Saanich, Oak Bay, and Esquimalt, all supported District of Saanich originally. Saanich agreed to take the lead on this, and that while there would be some cost to the other municipalities, they were taking the lead, and I think the impact on our staff resources would be less than if we were, I'm going to try a pun here, in the driver's seat. I'm supportive of it for those reasons, and I appreciate the concerns expressed by Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I understand the concerns Councillor O'Keefe raised last time with respect to the motion that was before us. But look, we've already said we want to participate in the pilot. So the question here is, do we want to see it reduced from 40 to 30, not whether or not those other issues that we have already voted on are pertinent. So I support the motion. We had a number of letters from residents and from the public at large encouraging us to do so, and I think it makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fallett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, reducing speeds is going to be safer for everybody. The impact of an accident, actually we shouldn't call it an accident, an incident between a motor vehicle and another vehicle or a person or a cyclist is going to be less severe if at a slower speed. As I spoke to previously, I would prefer in Sydney that we take an overall approach and look at our whole community, as in how do our speed limits from one area to another align with one another. I'd like to make sure that we're doing something consistent and over the whole picture. I am supportive of reducing this down to 30, so I don't have any issue with that. I do have some concerns because it's called a pilot project, and I don't know what data we're using, if we're using the RCMP traffic reports, the quarterly traffic reports, if they're working from that and looking at the incidents or whatever. But there it is. I'll support it. but I am concerned with us being in a pilot project because I don't know where we're starting from in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed, Councillor O'Keefe. The motion carries. Thank you. And last we'll turn to, or sorry, we do have two more. Item 14E is the fundraising letter of intent for pickleball courts in Sydney from the Saanich Peninsula Pickleball Association dated March the 31st.
I'll move it be referred to community engagement process.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question through to staff, please. In the last paragraph of this letter, the first sentence reads, "We would also like you to be aware that we will be asking our members to contribute directly by making tax-deductible donations to the town of Sydney to help fund these courts." And my question, well, first of all, we had certainly encouraged, I know I have certainly encouraged the Saanich Peninsula Pickleball Association to initiate some fundraising initiatives. However, at no point do I recollect the town indicating that the town would facilitate tax-deductible receipts, for example, as a part of that process. And my question to staff is, has there been some dialogue in the background that has legitimized the suggestion here in the letter from the association?
Thank you.
Through the Mayor to Councillor Rintoul, we have had some discussions with the Pickleball Association, and should it become an officially sanctioned town project, we would be in a position then to take donations and issue tax receipts, but not until that time.
Thank you for that clarification. So it's somewhat premature if people are getting their checkbooks out at this point in time. Is that correct?
That is correct. It has to be an official town project for us to have the ability to issue those receipts.
Thank you very much for the Mayor, the staff.
Yes, thank you. We appreciate that clarification, Councillor and staff. Call a question, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And our last item under correspondence is the one we raised at Councillor Fallett's request, which is a letter from Ms. Townsend with regards to bike parking, and included in that is the reply from staff. Councillor Fallett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I asked this to be raised because it brings up something that I'm becoming more increasingly aware of, and that's bicycle parking in our new builds. So I don't have an issue as far as this particular letter writer, and I thank staff for their response. I think they gave an appropriate and fulsome response. What I just want to sort of bring to council's attention and staff and the community as large is we're seeing more and more bicycle usage, and certainly COVID has caused an increase in that. We're seeing it. We're also looking at doing an active transportation study. We're going through our OCP right now and looking at who we are as a community down the road. And I've had opportunity because over the years I've looked at a lot of condos. Part of it is just I'm a bit of a real estate junkie and I like to look at them. But I've also had an opportunity, especially of late, where the buildings are changing. We're getting smaller suites. We're reducing parking, eliminating parking. And so when I look at the bicycle storage, oftentimes the bicycle storage is for bicycles to be hoisted up on the wall, mounted on the wall. Well, we're also seeing people who are riding electric bikes, and that's going to be a little bit prohibitive if you've got a 40 to 60 pound bicycle to roll it up and hang it on the wall. What about people who are riding tricycles? What about families who have got multiple bikes? So what I just wanted to bring to people's awareness is that we need to take a look at when we get these projects coming before us, developers who are coming up and saying, here's our bicycle storage, the units themselves are smaller. People are not going to be able to store the things in their homes like we did when we were building 1,200 and 1,500 square foot condos. We're also seeing buildings coming up that aren't coming with storage facilities. And where do people's recreational toys get stored? So I just wanted to take a moment and say that this is an important letter that this letter writer wrote, and it's an important issue of who we are as a community and how we're going to facilitate the people who are moving in and living in our community. And bicycle storage seems to be a little thing, but it actually is a big thing. It's something that we're moving towards, and we need to ensure that we do have places for people to store their bicycles. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. We appreciate that. And so if we could have a motion to receive, Councillor, or from Council.
A motion to receive?
Yeah, we do have to receive the correspondence, or we should receive the correspondence.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And so we do have 5 remaining items of correspondence for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. No notices of motion or motion to go on camera this evening. Our last is motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you, Councillor. Have a good evening.